Chicago's Morning Answer continues next on AM 560, The Answer.
Now, from the Signature Bank Studios.
If you're looking for the latest news, insight into what it means, and the sharpest opinion, there's only one station in Chicago where you can turn, and it's this one. We're AM 560, The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. Interesting two-part investigative piece over at Restoration News by Matt Wolfson, investigative journalist who writes at Oppo-research.com. And it involves a B-1 bomber crash that occurred a little bit more than a year ago at Ellsworth Air Force Base in South Dakota, home to the 28th Bomb Wing of the Global Strike Command's 8th Air Force. And thankfully, the crew was able to eject and no one was killed. But the Wolfson piece goes into the details of the report documenting why the crash occurred and how that report is indicative of a fundamental culture problem within the armed services, something that Pete Hegseth is poised to confront. For more on why it is indicative, how it illustrates the larger problem, we're pleased to be joined by the aforesaid Matt Wolfson. Again, he writes at Oppo-research.com. Matt, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Hey, Dan. Hey, Amy. It's great to be back. It's really great to be back. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, pleasure. So tell us about this B-1 bomber crash and your review of the report and why it's important.
Well, I first spoke to a source who I know separately who served in the military, and we were talking about some of the things that this source saw as going wrong, and the source put me on to this, happened to mention this crash, and I sounded, and the report was so damning that in this source's telling that it sounded interesting, and so I looked it up. And even within, I say this from the piece in Restoration, even within, the context of technical military jargon, it's absolutely damning. He says there's an unhealthy organizational culture that permitted degradation, I'm quoting now, that permitted degradation of airmanship skills, inadequate focus on governing directives, lack of discipline, and poor communication regarding airfield conditions and hazards. And when you dig in to the actual technicalities of the report, every part, every aspect of what could go wrong went wrong. And it wasn't just, say, with the pilot, with the crew, the four-man crew, which didn't perform the cross-check correctly. It was also with the people in charge of looking at weather. It was also with the commander in charge on the ground who was doing administrative paperwork rather than actually focusing on the landing of the B-1 bomber, even though the weather was bad. And when you put the report together with numerous other reports that have been, coming on military websites, congressional reports about crashes in the Air Force, what it shows is what I call, based on what the source who I talked to said, the word I use is spreadsheeting. And it's basically the growth of bureaucrats, lawyers, administrators, procurement officers, and the shrinking at the same time over the last 25 years of actual personnel. There's data that backs that up. I cited in the piece, and the result of it pretty clearly has been highly trained soldiers who are supposed to and who want to. When you read what these people say, when you talk to them, who want to do the mission, who want to fly planes and fling bombs, they're now at the mercy of soft-handed administrators in Washington, D.C., who care about reducing liability, who care about, giving money to Boeing or Lockheed on the big new technological thing rather than helping the soldiers, So to me, digging into this the last 3 weeks, I was stunned. I think next to our border crisis is absolutely the biggest crisis we face.
So this is what Hegseth is talking about, and others are talking about when they focus in on DEI and sort of the politicization of the services, as we saw on display repeatedly in congressional hearings with Lloyd Austin and Mark Milley talking about their Marxist reading lists and diversity and all of these things, and so it's that's just because you don't like you don't like their politics, Dan. And it's like, well, no, there are implications to this, and we're talking about this again and again when it comes to these institutions that are failing or struggling to abide their objectives, their stated objectives, which is, we're seeing with the LA Fire Department right now and the city council and the mayor. When you focus on something that is not the main thing, then you start performing the main thing less efficiently. I mean, this is not that complicated, and that's exactly what's happened even at the highest ranks of the military.
I think that's absolutely right. I think it sums it right up. I mean, what I found and what the second part of the report documents is the Ellsworth Air Force Base, where the crash occurred, in 2021 bragged of being the first Air Force base to initiate a DEI program. And then in 2023, I mean, this is all public information, praised one of its senior commanders for teaching DEI in, entry-level classes that they have there. And, you're wondering what things could she have been teaching? But the second point, they're really not, as you say, focused on the ball. The other thing I'd say is that what I found is DEI, which is Marxist, is the final sort of nail in the coffin or turning the screw to something that's been 20 years in the making, which is, just to give one statistic, civilian DOD employment, these are bureaucrats, grew 105,000 between 2000 and 2015. Uniformed employment grew just 22,000. So you have 80,000 over 15 years more civilians than soldiers. And this has only increased since more budget cuts because of Obama-backed sequestration, starting in 2011. And the DEI, what I found, is the natural extension of this risk management mentality. Oh, everybody in the culture is angry about, race. Oh, we might get sued over race. Okay, bring in a woke chaplain. Okay, and so woke is sort of the final turn on this 25-year shift of focus from the people serving to bureaucrats. And I think that's why Hegseth is so important, because he's the first SecDef that I know of. I mean, I don't know the full history of the 75 years, but he's the first one I know of who really, not only a decorated veteran, but he was in the trenches. I mean, he relates to the men and women. He's there for the soldiers. That's who he identifies with. He has no experience in bureaucracy.
Right, he's warrior-centric and not bureaucracy or brass-centric, which is a big difference, and it hopefully portends a culture change. I mean, one of the things that happens, too, people say, we're talking about DOGE and $900 billion Pentagon budget and so forth, and obviously there's waste that can be cut out of that, I'm sure, and procurement rules that need to be looked at. But it's also when the culture is not hyper-focused on the stated objectives, then you have all sorts of externalities that creep up. And so you have a situation where you've got $900 billion budget, and as you report, misspending leading to frightening vulnerabilities. One example was flyers reusing expendable $5 filters on aircraft because they couldn't afford new filters. So $900 billion, it's like the Chicago public school system. It's $10 billion, but we don't have pencils and books. It's $900 billion, but we don't have $5 filters, so we got to reuse the old ones.
Absolutely. And then I think, to draw that analogy, because I follow you guys all the time on X and I listen to you. And to draw that analogy out, it's all about the money. The procurement officers are looking to invest in Boeing and Lockheed because they're going to go there someday. It's a revolving door. I mean, one of the things Hegseth has said is we're going to stop that revolving door. He said that publicly, and so just like the Chicago public school system where, they want unauthorized. Now I'm Pelosiing myself. They want illegal immigrants in the schools because then they'll get money from the federal government to hire more teachers. But they're just bringing in more bodies. I mean, they're overwhelming themselves in the name of money. And the Pentagon's doing the same thing. It's investing horrendous amounts in these bells and whistles. And then in the meantime, by one report, flight training time in the actual Air for officers since 2013 has fallen from 17 hours a month to 4 hours a month.
Oh, my gosh.
I'm just going to say that one more time. 17 hours a month to 4 hours a month.
Well, when you go back to that day on January 4th, 2024, I mean, it was foggy conditions. They tried to land on runway 13, but the weather visibility sensor had stopped functioning 6 weeks before. How did the pilots not get that information? Is it because of the lack of hours or because of communication between them and air traffic control?
What Lord found, thank you so much for reading it so specifically, Amy. I mean, what Lord found was there wasn't communication on the base. And one of the reasons was people were more focused on literally checking the boxes, performing administrative tasks, than actually doing their job. So people didn't feel the need to communicate certain things. They felt the need to do their quote-unquote job and then check a box saying that they did their job. The really damning example from that report was that one of the four-man crew during the cross-check, because the weather people failed to communicate to the tower people and the defense commander was literally doing paperwork, the crew was landing blind. So what you really need is a cross-check, like on every plane we're ever in. Pilot says we're preparing to cross-check, making sure conditions are okay.
Right.
Well, the report indicated that one of the four-man crew, first of all, certain orders based on the audio recording weren't apparently given in the cross-check. Secondly, one of the four-man crew, quote-unquote, freely admitted to investigators that he was referencing his after-landing checklist during landing instead of fulfilling his landing cross-check duty. And that really sums up the problem with spreadsheeting. People are focused on the boxes, not on communication with each other to get the mission done.
I got a text from a friend whose son is a pilot in the military. My son only flies 10 to 12 hours a month as an active pilot. So just speaking to what you were saying in terms of the sharpening your skills. So on the training side as well as on the, just the regularity of flying to make sure you continue to enhance your skills. You got to do something to improve your skills, right? So that's one thing. The other thing I just want to go back to, sort of this agency capture issue, which you wouldn't think in a $900 billion agency there would be agency capture, but there is. You point out about the consolidation of the defense industry, aerospace defense contractors, prime ones, going from 51 in 1993 to just 5 today. And we heard from Senator Mark Wayne Mullen in Oklahoma reminding the senators during the Hegseth confirmation hearing that they had to vote on a waiver for Lloyd Austin to serve as SecDef because he was coming off the board of Raytheon, to your point about the brass going to serve on those boards.
Right.
But this example that you give that I guess comes from a report filed by Eric Prince about what we could have helped the Israeli Defense Forces with and why we didn't. Tell that story.
I really appreciate you bringing that up because I read this 6 months ago and I thought this, and I've never heard it since, and I think it must be the most underreported story of 2024. Of course, there's a lot of competition, but after October, the IDF, whatever you think of that conflict, they definitely needed to go in there and clean up Hamas. Hamas is a terrorist organization and it was hiding in the tunnels. And they constructed this network of tunnels. Hamas had done this specifically, so that they would be protected from bombing and it would hit civilians, which would make the IDF look really bad and, quote unquote, the eyes of the world. It was to deter an attack. Well, according to Eric Prince, small firms in America, reasonably mid-sized firms that do defense contracting, offered the IDF Texas precision drilling technology to flood these tunnels. And obviously what that would allow the IDF to do is flood the tunnels and not bomb Gaza, not kill civilians who Hamas are hiding behind, not, allow this golden PR opportunity for Hamas and Iran and China, who's, backing them both. And this is, if anything sums up the Biden White House, it's this. The IDF, according to Prince, could not take advantage of this offer because the DOD put out a quote-unquote diktat bureaucrats in the DOD said, you need to go with the corporate players who manufacture bombs. You need to go with the Lockheeds and the Boeings. And so the carnage that not only caused all sorts of problems over there for both Israel and Palestinians, but also, led to these, horrific scenes on our college campuses of lawlessness and destruction, by people who are supposed to learn. You can argue, at least according to Prince, that the root cause of this was the Pentagon bureaucracy and this revolving door and this mutual sort of capture between bureaucrats and corporatists. Thank you, Dick Cheney. This is his legacy.
Unbelievable. But Pete Hegseth certainly has his work cut out for him. Matt Wolfson, investigative journalist who writes at Oppo-research.com, Oppo-research.com. Do check out his two-part piece. I'll tweet it out. The armed forces need to be put back in the hands of the soldiers, which you can find at Restoration News as well. Matt, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Dan, Amy, such a pleasure as always. Thank you.
Thank you. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
There's only one radio show in Chicago talking about today's biggest stories and telling you what they really mean. That show is this one, Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560, The Answer.
Balance of Nature's fruits and veggies supplements, changing the world one life at a time.
So when we saw the advertisements for this by reputable people, I told my husband, I said, well, we don't have anything to lose, so let's do it. Within a month, I could see a difference. It's really great. Y'all should let me do those commercials. Do you know how many people I have gotten to take Balance of Nature?
Start your journey with Balance of Nature supplements today. Call 1-800-246-8751 or go to balanceofnature.com.